Hey guys, it's Nick the Booksmith. Welcome back, welcome back. Today I have a CraftTime mysteries for you as we continue to work on the little eco print book. You may or may not have heard about this case, but it has been around a while. During the late 1990s, 4 elderly seniors went missing in Ontario. No one was ever charged, but the police have always suspected the Land family to be responsible. You see, at the time, the Lands owned and operated a number of retirement homes in the area. Recently, a judge ordered the unsealing of some Ontario Provincial Police, or OPP, files. According to those files, the Lands were systematically defrauding the senior residents by stealing their pension and benefit checks, and continued to do so even after they died. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here. I first want to talk about Joan Lawrence. In her younger years, Joan was a published poet and worked as a freelance copywriter for Chatelaine, Ottawa Citizen, and the Toronto Star. She married and divorced during the 1960s, and in the 70s, she was caring for her elderly parents in Toronto until they both had passed away. She lived on an $800 a month pension and would drift between boarding houses and shelters after a fire destroyed her home in 1994. A quarrel in the family caused a rift between Joan's mother and her sisters, and just like that, Joan lost touch with the family. She was alone and vulnerable to any con artist she happened upon. In the meantime, the Land family had opened their first retirement home.
Catherine, her brothers Paul, Walter, and David, and their uncle Ron Allen got involved in a new family business. They set up 3 retirement facilities in the woods outside Huntsville, including this one on the shores of Siding Lake.
And Joan would move into the attic of the Cedar Pines Christian Retirement Lodge. The brochure advertised attractive, affordable rooms in a cozy home-like atmosphere with on-site nurses, dietitians, and engaging activities like bowling and woodwork. Despite its lofty-sounding name, though, Cedar Pines was basically just a house on the side of Highway 518, just north of Huntsville. Sometime in 1997, Joan complained that the rent was too high, so she was moved 27 miles south to another property that the Lands owned, and this was called the Land Farm. And at this property, she moved into an 8x10 shed. The floor was covered with newspapers. There was no insulation, no running water, no electricity. For 2 frigid Canadian winters, her only source of heat was a space heater plugged into an extension cord from the main house. For the privilege of these luxury accommodations, she paid over either $600 or $700 a month, depending on the source you reference. And these living conditions were horrific, absolutely unacceptable on any level. But the reason why Joan stayed was because this was the only place on the Land's property where she would be able to keep her cats with her. And she loved her cats. They were her children. She had no money to go anywhere else. She felt trapped, and so she stayed. The locals of the area would call her the cat lady, and they would see her walking to town from the Land farm, which was about 8 miles, so that she could buy cat food. Police became aware of Joan's living situation in September of '98 when a detective named Rob Matthews and the local fire chief visited the property. You see, a social worker had informed the police after speaking with a client who also lived on the property. That day, they found Joan holed up in the shed with her cats. Adult Protective Services were called and started making plans to remove her from that property, but Joan had previously said that she wouldn't leave without her cats. Around this time, Joan visited a local law firm to help her gather evidence against the landlords. You see, she never received her $744 tax return check and thought that it was probably stolen. The staff helped her track down the missing check, and they were told that it had been issued and cashed earlier that spring. But the signature on the back of the check was not Joan's. So the firm began building evidence for a case to help Joan so she could take this to the police. In early October, staff at the law firm reached out to Joan to say that the paperwork for the police was ready, but she never arrived to pick it up. Joan disappeared sometime in November of '98. On November 25th, she was reported missing by 57-year-old Alan Marshall, who also lived at the land farm. He told the police that he heard gunshots and saw a backhoe on the property around the last time he had seen Joan. Detective Aaron Burke was then assigned to investigate a possible missing persons case. She started looking into the landlords of this property and learned that the farm was owned by 3 of the Land brothers, David, Walter, and Paul. The brothers' uncle, Ron Allen, also lived on the property, and he would drive Joan to the post office and the bank so she could cash her pension checks. Catherine, who was one of the sisters of the Land brothers, owned Cedar Pines Christian Retirement Lodge, which was Joan's previous home that she had just moved from. By the end of 1998, there were 2 active police investigations into the members of the Land family. One of them was looking to see if the residents were victims of fraud, and the other was regarding Joan's disappearance. It was at this time that the Lands started getting rid of their retirement homes and leaving the Muskoka area. The Lands' last active retirement home was Fern Glen Manor. Now, buckle up because this part's gonna make you mad. In January of 1999, a week before it closed, so this is like less than 2 months after Joan disappeared, Detective Burke went to interview the home's remaining residents about her disappearance. One person she spoke with was 69-year-old Ralph Grant. According to these police files, they believe Grant entered the Land's care earlier that winter. And people who knew Grant would later tell police that he couldn't wash or feed himself and that he had some difficulty speaking because he had had surgery on his jaw. A week after Detective Burke visited the property, Fern Glen closed, and its final residents moved down the road to the private home of Fern Glen's manager, Melina Simic. The next year, in July 2000, police discovered that there were 2 more seniors who could not be accounted for. One of them was 90-year-old John Semple, who police believe had also been living at Fern Glen Manor. Investigators think he went missing sometime between January and March of '98. The other man was 71-year-old John Crofts, who the police think ended up at Fern Glen Manor sometime in 1997. And from what they could gather, he was last seen in February or March of '98. I know there's a lot of dates here, so stay with me. Then in November of 2000, police added another name to the list. When they followed up with Melina Simic at her house that month, Ralph Grant wasn't there. She told Detective Burke she didn't know where he was. She said that he had not arrived at her residence when Fern Glen Manor closed, and according to a record of the interview with Detective Burke, she thought Detective Matthews, who was the one that discovered Joan living in the shed, had relocated Mr. Grant. Immediately, authorities began investigating Mr. Grant's disappearance, but they failed to find any leads and could not figure out where he was. None of the three gentlemen were ever reported missing, yet the Land family continued to cash their benefit checks. According to police documents, Paul and Walter would drive to homeless shelters in Toronto's east side, and they'd work their way past the staff by describing themselves as senior consultants and placement officers. Then they'd look for seniors who received old age security and other benefit checks, but had little or no family connections, which is really, really sketchy. Because the Retirement Homes Act didn't pass until 2010, no one was screening the lands or questioning the legitimacy of their retirement homes. At one of the homes, 11 elderly people were reported to be crammed into a 4-bedroom house with mattresses on the floor. Residents would pay between $400 and $750 a month to rent a shared bedroom or a tiny outbuilding. And if they were lucky, they were fed Kraft dinner 3 times a day. In April 2001, Catherine was arrested and charged with fraud. In the summer of 2002, Walter, Paul, and David were charged together with 6 counts of fraud and 6 counts of theft in what the media called a pension check scam. Walter and Paul pled guilty to their charges and received conditional sentences or community service for those of us in the States. They also received restitution orders to pay back and probation. Catherine was convicted and, according to court documents, was required to serve community service for 9 months. And for some unknown reason, the charges against David were dropped. But those reasons were never made public, so we don't know. But none of the Lands ever went to jail on any of those charges. When the media reported on the 4 missing seniors in 2001, Walter was spinning a story that it was the police who had relocated the missing seniors, which sounds familiar because Melina Simic, who was one of the managers that lost Ralph Grant, she also was saying, oh no, well, it was Detective Matthews that, took Ralph away. I don't know where he is. Walter told a Toronto Sun reporter that he and his family were the actual victims, that they were trying to help Joan, but it ended up backfiring on them. He claimed that the kindness his family had shown her had been repaid with a homicide investigation, and that the police were trying to sink them, quote unquote, for these missing people, but the case was just a, quote, dead issue now. So I hear you asking, what is our favorite family of degenerates up to now? Well, Catherine was a busy girl. Not only did she amass an extensive criminal record for possession, extortion, theft, and fraud, she changed the spelling of her last name at least 6 times and would alter her appearance. So what are we hiding from, Catherine? Her whereabouts were last known to be in Bracebridge, Ontario, using the name Smith and the title of neuropathic doctor, of which she most certainly is not, as officially confirmed by the Ontario College of Naturopaths. And although I could not find an obituary, apparently she passed away in July of 2019. Now, Walter was convicted of assaulting and robbing senior citizens in multiple home invasions and spent over 11 years in prison. Court documents say that during each home invasion, Walter was armed with either a gun or a knife and forcibly confined the victims to gain their compliance, which resulted in severe psychological harm. Oh, keeping it classy, aren't we, Walter? According to some reporting by the Fifth Estate, he and his brother David now live in Toronto and work in heating and air conditioning. Their contact info notes that they offer a senior discount. So, yeah. In 2006, Paul and his wife moved to South Korea. After getting a master's in Christian education in 2014, he began teaching English at, I'm going to butcher this, Samayuk University in Seoul. However, in 2017, when the Fifth Estate and the Walrus put the case back in the spotlight, the Korea Times reports that the university wasted no time and stripped him of his professorship and terminated his contract. We don't know where he is now. Could not find any trace of Paul and his wife. Maybe they've changed their names, going incognito somehow. But what about Uncle Ron? Well, after many unsuccessful attempts to find him, he was finally tracked down by the Fifth Estate in 2019. But he didn't want to comment. Wonder why? Despite extensive and repeated searches by police, the bodies of the 4 missing seniors have yet to be found and are now considered homicide victims by the Ontario Provincial Police. At a news conference in 2019, OPP Interim Deputy Commissioner Paul Beasley said, "At the time of their disappearances, all 4 had one thing in common: where they lived. Our goal is simply to find out what happened to these 4 souls. Police cannot solve these types of crimes on our own, especially those that remain unsolved for long periods of time. Police rely on citizens and witnesses to help victims, families, and communities find resolution." While Catherine and her 2 siblings were convicted of stealing the residents' money before and after they went missing, and 2 of those family members were identified as prime suspects for Joan's disappearance and most likely murder, no one has ever been held accountable for those 4 missing people in Muskoka. The original detective on Joan's case, do you remember Erin Burke? She resigned from the OPP in 2001. Even so, I think it's important to note that only a few weeks into her investigation, she wrote the following words in her report. "I believe that David Land and Ron Allen have committed the offense of murder in the first degree upon victim Joan Dorothy Lawrence, sometime between October 28th and November 27th, 1998. Rewards for information have been posted for each victim, and the cases remain active. So anyone with new information is highly encouraged to call the dedicated missing persons hotline or submit information by email." So what do you all think? The burden of proof, of course, lies with the Crown, but do you think there's enough circumstantial evidence to make a case against the Lands? I don't live in Canada, and so I am not as familiar with their laws on criminal cases like this. In the United States, there have been people convicted of murder on circumstantial evidence because it was very, very strong. Which personally, just my personal uneducated opinion, I believe that the evidence against this family is rock solid. But again, I'm just me. This is just me. But I don't know how the Canadian law feels about circumstantial evidence. In Canada, do you have to have a body to have a case? I don't know. If you live in Canada, let me know. Or do you feel that the Lands have been railroaded by the OPP and are also victims here? So let me know what you think in the comment section below. We got a lot done on the book today, and I will continue this book with our next story. Thank you for hanging out with me today, and I will see you all really, really soon in the next video. Bye, guys.